Readers, I'm wondering how things have been going with your new rereading strategy that we talked about yesterday. Were you able to do some rereading in your independent reading time? And how did it go? The thing is, sometimes rereading helps, and sometimes it doesn't. Do you want to know why? One big reason is that authors have to make decisions about what to include and what to leave out. Sometimes they leave out background information because they expect you to know it, or because the thing they're referencing doesn't matter all that much to the central ideas in the text. In those situations, rereading won't be enough because the text doesn't include all the information you need to understand. Today, I want to teach you that readers are alert for when they no longer fully understand, or when they're fascinated and realize they'd like to know more. In these situations, it sometimes helps to reread and look inside the text for answers. Other times, though, readers have to look outside the text for help. I bet there are parts where this has happened to you, parts where you encountered something pretty confusing and comprehension broke down, or you realized there was something you'd like to know more about that the book isn't fully teaching you. Flip through your book and find a part like this, a part that you were confused by, or a part that you wanted to know more about. I'm going to show you what I do when comprehension breaks down for me and when I want to know more. Try to note the steps I follow. You can jot them down if it helps. In a few minutes, you'll think about how you could do similar work with the part in your book that you flagged. Last night, I reread part of Hidden Figures, and I stumbled upon this part where comprehension just broke down for me, and it was something I feel like I want to know more about. Listen as I reread it, and see if this happens for you too. Since the beginning of the year, newspapers around the country had discussed the racial crisis in Little Rock, Arkansas. 9 black teenagers trying to integrate the all-white Central High School had turned the state's capital city into a military battleground. The Arkansas National Guard had been called out to prevent the black students from entering the school. In response, the federal government sent U.S. troops to escort the 9 students into the school. The crisis unfolded over days, and each morning Christine followed the news of the brave children who were close to her in age. The showdown had dominated the headlines, and then the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. The Russians did it. They had created a satellite and launched it into orbit, and they did it before the United States. With tensions between the two countries already high because of the Cold War, the news put everyone further on edge. The United States needed to catch up. When I read this part, all the references to Sputnik jumped out to me as kind of confusing. I don't think rereading will pay off, though. We read that whole section yesterday, and the only thing we learned about Sputnik is that it was a satellite that the Russians launched into space. Okay, so now I've got to determine whether it's worth it to research outside the text. Here's a tip. Just like when you were rereading, you have to prioritize. You have to ask, is this important enough to be worth doing some research? Usually, you'll know if something is worth going outside the text to research if the author repeats it regularly, if it seems closely linked to the central ideas in the text, or if it's something you're just fascinated by. What do you think? Is this part worth some outside research? I think that Sputnik is worth researching. I hope you agree. The author repeated the term Sputnik a ton, And there was even a heading that mentioned Sputnik, so it might tie into some of the central ideas in the chapter. Readers, have you already noticed a few steps that I've taken as a reader? Keep watching closely because you'll draw on these steps in a few minutes. Now it's time to do some on the run research. To do this, I often pull up a web browser, type in a search item, and then quickly scan the results to see which might pay off most to pursue. So I'm going to search Sputnik and see what comes up. The results are in. Which title to choose? Will you skim the titles and the descriptions of the first few searches and think, which of these might help us learn the most about Sputnik? So either the Wikipedia page or the NASA history could pay to study. So how about we investigate the NASA page first, since we know that NASA was also involved in the space race? This page is fairly short. I find that it helps to read the introduction, then skim the rest of the sections to see if any of them seem useful. Listen and consider how this information will help you understand Sputnik even better. Sputnik and the dawn of the space age. History changed on October 4th, 1957, when the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik 1. The world's first artificial satellite was about the size of a beach ball, 58 centimeters or 22.8 inches in diameter, weighed only 83.6 kilograms or 183.9 pounds, and took about 98 minutes to orbit the Earth on its elliptical path. That launch ushered in new political, military, technological, and scientific developments. While the Sputnik launch was a single event, it marked the start of the space age and the US-USSR space race. Okay, that gives us a little more background information. Let's skim through and see if any other parts might be important. It feels like the next few paragraphs give background information. In 1952, in 1955. Maybe this next section will be important. It says that the launch changed everything. Let's read that. The Sputnik launch changed everything. As a technical achievement, Sputnik caught the world's attention and the American public off guard. Its size was more impressive than Vanguard's intended 3.5-pound payload. In addition, the public feared that the Soviets' ability to launch satellites also translated into the capability to launch ballistic missiles that could carry nuclear weapons from Europe to the US. Then the Soviets struck again. On November 3rd, Sputnik 2 was launched, carrying a much heavier payload, including a dog named Leica. I bet you've got some new understanding about Sputnik now, don't you? Going outside the text to build background knowledge is useful, because it helps us understand the text more deeply. Let's try that now. I'll reread just the last bit we read where Sputnik was mentioned. Let's use all the new information to understand that part more deeply. The showdown had dominated the headlines, and then the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. The Russians did it. They had created a satellite and launched it into orbit, and they did it before the United States. With tensions between the two countries already high because of the Cold War, this news put everyone further on edge. The United States needed to catch up. What do you understand now about this part that you might not have understood before? Take a minute to pause and think about this. Readers, were you paying attention to the moves that I made throughout this lesson? I've captured them here on this chart. When comprehension breaks down, or readers need to know more, it pays to think, is this worth rereading and researching? If it is, decide whether to look inside the text and reread or to look outside the text and do some research. Whether you reread or research, do something that should help you understand that confusing part even better. So you already have that one part in your book in mind where you could try this work. So before you head off to read, take a minute to think through what you might try in order to understand that part better. Will you reread, research, or something else? Once you have a plan, head off, remembering to draw on all you know about reading literary nonfiction to help you.